Oh boy, okay, I did not expect to be talking about this topic anytime soon, but actually I was inspired to by a post I saw online and figured, yeah, let's just fucking go for it. Hello everybody, my name is Joanna, I'm the Polish folk witch, and today we are going to be talking about shadow work and especially about why I personally don't offer shadow work resources for people anymore. If you've been with me for a long time on my socials, back in the day in I think 2015, I started offering resources for shadow work, and it kind of started as this challenge where folks would have a list of prompts to engage with for the purpose of personal shadow work, and it kind of took off. Many people loved it, and so I offered those resources in more and more advanced form over the years, which kind of had its peak at the beginning of my Patreon offerings in 2020, when I first offered an entire workbook about shadow work through a specific theme, and then also a course in shadow journeying, which was an evolution of shadow work through completely different tools that had to do with trance work, journey work, somatic work, instead of those more intellectual tools that you can use for shadow work. And that was my last offering when it comes to resources related to shadow work. And I don't offer stuff like this anymore. And I would like to talk to you about the why and discuss some of the aspects of shadow work in general that we see in the, as some people like to call it, psychospiritual community or psychospiritual types of practices. And yeah, let's just fucking talk about it. Let's unwrap this. And before we start, I just want to briefly say that none of this is for the purpose of shitting on shadow work, disproving shadow work, or trying to criticize people who do shadow work offerings for people. I don't care. You do you, I do me. I have a background in psychology, and I do know these tools from a more, you could say, professional perspective as well, even though I am not a psychoanalyst specifically. That needs to be mentioned as well, I suppose. But I have my thoughts also just coming from the fact that I've been offering these things for enough years to be able to observe the tangible results of this kind of work when it's offered through an online format and in this context of spirituality, perhaps including divination into the mix and stuff like that. So I just want to unpack all of this and talk about it. So what initially inspired me to have this chat today and not in a year was a post I saw on social media from Tyler Alterman. I don't know the guy, I don't know who he is, I just saw this particular post and I thought it was brilliant, so I'm going to read some of it for you and insert some screenshots on your screen to read along with me, but I will also link the post where I saw it below so you can check it out for yourself. So Tyler says, possible huge problem with psychospiritual journeys. Yes, there are deep structures in the labyrinth of my mind, and yes, I will have profound insights and fundamental shifts when I bring them into full awareness. And yet, after years of self-work, I'm starting to suspect a large amount of the labyrinth is actually procedurally generated, like a video game map that builds itself on the spot the further you travel across it. It would be like this sequence playing out. Point 1. I dive deep into the labyrinth of my mind. Point 2. The mind goes, oh, he's expecting to find some deep structures. Let me generate some of those that are consistent with the rest of me. Oh, he's also expecting to find some enemies there, so let me spawn some demons. Point 3. Lo and behold, there is more, for example, unresolved trauma to resolve. I think that this process is especially responsive to my motivation, So if I want to be in the narrative of psychospiritual journey, complete with shocking moments of insight, subtext, so that I can procrastinate finding a job, building relationships, pursuing my big scary calling, etc., well, then the mind will be happy to help. It will procedurally generate an infinite psychospiritual landscape for me to discover. I suspect that the dynamic I describe above is why many psychospiritual delvers seem like they're just moving in circles. Yes, the mind is vast and there's tons of actually wild stuff in there to explore. Yes, in my humble opinion, mind is humanity's true final frontier. But also, in some important way, you might be making it up. In short, looking for psychospiritual insight, inner prediction engine goes brrr, makes up insight. That's it. I'm not going to quote the rest of the post. If you enjoy this, go and check it out. My initial response to this was, fuck yes, this is exactly it. And in fact, I talked about this very thing in a video exclusive for my patrons at the beginning of 2021, so over 3 years ago now. The video is called Descending Deeper, When Shadow Work Turns into Shadow Conquering or Shadow Hoarding. I would like to insert pieces of this video after I'm done talking, so that you can kind of maybe see where I was coming from at that time. I think it's fascinating, honestly. But long story short, yes, my observations when it comes to folks engaging in shadow work broadly in the spiritual community, which is often seen to be kind of engaged with via some journaling prompts, via tarot spreads, and those very introspective activities that basically kind of prompt your mind to come up with results that show you some things you were unaware of, show you maybe where a certain pain or trauma or trait that you don't like about yourself, or limitation, etc., or fear, or shame, and or guilt, and so on, where it comes from, of what you might not have been previously aware fully, that kind of a thing, right? We all know, I'm guessing, we all know what shadow work is if you are watching this at least. If not, please just Google basic descriptions or definitions of that to be on the same page as me. But basically, when we engage in those activities, I have noticed from my observations that in fact the mind is very eager to pick up stuff like this and run with it. And we know this is something that's been studied and proven in psychology, that our mind is great at generating content that does not originate from our experiences. And that has to do, for example, with completely making up memories, entire stories of what happened to us, just based on some prompts that were kind of planted in the mind in various ways, very specific ways. But that also has to do with, things we feel kind of fragile about, or the way we perceive ourselves, or basically the contents of our psyche that have those pushback dynamics kind of for us, right? So, of course, all of us as humans have stuff to work through to improve ourselves as, inhabitants of this earth. But there's ways to engage with that kind of stuff that are constructive and actually bear some kind of fruit. You can see results of that. You can see changes in your life very tangibly. Versus there are ways to engage with that in a way that is kind of like trying to uncover the entire map, but never actually traversing the map, if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say by that is that if the only way you engage in those kinds of activities is for the purpose to know thyself as much as possible, but never actually do anything about it, take any actions, make any actual changes, try and work through the things that are tough for you to change. Exercise those things, right? If you never do any of those things and you just keep exploring and finding out about stuff and learning more and more about yourself, I would classify that as a kind of fixation or obsession. It kind of serves as something that's supposed to replace doing actual work. You feel good about yourself because you feel like you are doing the work with uncovering all that shit, but a lot of the times it's almost like a masochistic pleasure that one takes from it, or oftentimes also coming from wounds that have to do with being treated like shit by others, and then internalizing that negative self-talk and basically treating yourself as shit, and just continuing with that, and using shadow work as a tool to continue with that. You know what I mean? So just trying to come at it from a perspective of, wow, I'm so harsh with myself. I'm not trying to hide anything from myself. I will not try to explain my shortcomings or the things I'm unaware of, etc. And kind of wearing it as a badge of honor, something to brag about before yourself in the mirror, like, wow, I'm so great, I'm doing this work. But if you're not seeing any changes, if you're going in circles around the same topics, and let's say you engage with shadow work every year. So if you've worked through some things last year and then this year you're doing it again, and most of the contents that come up are the same fucking issues, the same fucking problems, perhaps you're not actually doing the work, okay? That's the trap that many of us fall into when we do this kind of stuff. And again, from my observations, when I offer content like this, tools like this for people, I have zero control over how people are going to use this. And I know, because I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people who told me, you know, your offerings of shadow work really helped me work through some things, change some things, and I feel that I am much improved in this and this regard in my life as a result of that. And that's great, that happens, and I'm so happy every time that I received feedback like this over the years. But also what I'm seeing a lot and have been seeing over the years is what I just described to you, where people take those kinds of tools and use them as this kind of fetishistic almost way of putting themselves down and just wallowing in their issues, and cultivating this self-victimization kind of mentality that basically keeps you stuck in the same things under the guise of actually doing the work, which is kind of dangerous when you think about it, because it's really, and I'm not saying this, you know, to basically mock people, I guess, because all of us have this danger that comes directly from our mind, because our mind is very, very, very cunning in this regard, where it knows how to captivate us, how to keep us stuck in its mechanisms and prevent us from, you know, making actual changes. And it's really hard to do those changes by yourself when you are alone with it. That is why you oftentimes need a buddy of some kind. You need a therapist, or you need somebody who sees you from the outside perspective and can help you see the blind spots, can help you stay accountable to the work, right? So in that way, nobody's invulnerable to the trappings of our own mind and kind of remaining lost in the labyrinth of you know, those generated things, procedurally generated things that pop up. And I thought the way this guy actually described it in this way, you know, if you are a gamer, you know what procedurally generated maps are. Like, they are maps that are not pre-created by the designers, but the designers create like a mechanism that creates the maps as you go. so they didn't exist before you went there, basically, is what I'm trying to, I hope I'm explaining this right anyway. So that's what the mind does, and that's what our mind is great at. And when it comes to the, development of humanity as a species, this is a trait of our mind that's often very helpful in everyday life for inventing things, for being able to solve problems, for being able to survive, right? Broadly speaking. But when it comes to shadow work, it can become a problem. That's why it's important to keep oneself in check in this regard. And I think it's much more beneficial to either do this kind of work with somebody or just go to therapy, honestly, and achieve better results quicker and with more ease and more lasting results. At least that's my opinion on it personally. So while I don't think that shadow work in itself is a useless practice, I just think the way we engage with it or in it is very important and crucial, in fact, to the results that we see or we don't see, right? Which is, to sum up, why I personally stopped doing this kind of work, where I offer tools to people, or structured experience where you get prompts and kind of tools and specific themes to focus on, because I had zero control over how people would use it. And I would hate to be contributing to somebody's problems because they are not using those tools to their advantage. And of course, this is not something that I can blame on myself because, as I said, I have no control over it. But at the same time, what I can do is ensure that at least I'm not adding to the problem. And if somebody wants to engage with this kind of stuff, they can do so with many other resources that are out there at their own discretion, basically. So when it comes to especially this, because it is a trend in a way, shadow work, in conjunction with practices of occultism, witchcraft, it's very trendy to engage in shadow work. But a lot of the times people just have very twisted ways of understanding what it actually is, what the purpose is. And again, some of the things I told you as my observations, I see it a lot happening with practitioners of the occult or witchcraft when they engage with that kind of stuff on their own. There's also other ways of defining shadow work outside of the scope of psychology, or delving into your unconscious mind and bringing the things back into consciousness and integrating some things back into our consciousness. There's also ways, practices that are also called shadow work that are completely something else, and they have to do with actually working with spirits of the darker variety in a very specific way, but that's outside of the scope of this conversation. So I just want to clarify that when I'm talking about shadow work here, I'm talking about working with your unconscious, bringing some things into awareness and then integrating them so that you then are able to actually take action that induces the changes that you want to see, where you are actually resolving problems, you are improving the ways in which you are functioning as a human being, you gain a better understanding of the mechanisms that rule your psyche, you are better able to be aware of problems in the moment when they pop up, let's say in terms of the way we react to some things on a bodily level, on a somatic level, or emotionally. So that's the kind of shadow work I'm talking about, right? When you look at how people do shadow work, especially in the spiritual communities, it's usually just this part, just this uncovering. And I often see one thing that, in my opinion, is kind of dangerous even in and of itself, and that's the being like fixated on uncovering over and over, and that's just all that you do. So you never really go to the next part where you do something about what you uncovered, but instead you just look for new things to kind of gain consciousness of all the time. And this fixation on constantly broadening your consciousness, constantly learning new things about yourself can lead to situations where instead of actually getting to the real stuff that's important in your life, you start making stuff up. That's what happens when you just keep digging in the psyche without taking it to the next step, which would be actively doing something about it. So if we just keep digging and digging and digging, then we eventually get to the point where our psyche will kind of generate problems or generate those kind of twisted perspectives to look at who we are just for the sake of finding something new. So it's this kind of like an addiction almost to constantly finding new content in our psyche to analyze, to look at. Some people will constantly look for new ways to perhaps explain their experiences or explain their perception of the world, keep looking for things in order to find new things to kind of argue about with themselves, if that makes sense. So I know that some people do that as well. It can just get to the point where it becomes a slippery slope, because the point of shadow work is not to destabilize us, to fuck us over in the long run. It's for us to really find the most meaty, important, the biggest kind of aspects of the psyche that's rooted in ways of being that are not the most healthy, that are not the most beneficial for us. It's basically finding those aspects that we would actually benefit from improving, changing, or otherwise, actively doing something about them. It's not so much about trying to expand consciousness without end. That's not the point of shadow work, really. When we get to the point of like hitting a wall when it comes to new discoveries, that's a clear sign that we probably should just stop doing that and actually get to work. I don't know, maybe it's a weird comparison, but for me, it kind of seems like it's this consumerist mindset applied to shadow work, where you don't really want to work with the things that you already have. It's the same like with buying tarot decks, where instead of working with the decks you have, you will just get more and more and more, and they will just collect dust. So that's kind of how I see this approach to shadow work, where you would just focus and like kind of fixate on uncovering more and more and more. And it's kind of like collecting shadows to the point where they stop being real and they start kind of becoming something made up just for the sake of having more. So I don't know, you can look in the mirror and be like, wow, I uncovered so much of my shadows. I must be so advanced in this shit. And that's not how it works. If we just keep uncovering shit and we never get to the next level with that, it's pretty useless, and it can even work in our disadvantage. I think this is an interesting topic, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this as well. What are your experiences with shadow work? Have you ever engaged with this kind of work? Are you planning to, perhaps? Let me know anything and everything that you think about this. I'm eternally fascinated by shadow work, and shadow work is something that benefited me in my own life greatly. But again, I guess I was able to engage with it in ways that actually were constructive to my functioning as a human being. And I also have to admit that was not always the case. I've been in some moments in my life which you can classify as the dark night of the soul or just deep fucking depression, where I would be engaging in shadow work for all those kind of almost self-masturbatory purposes of wallowing in my own darkness or my own evil or my own sadness or my own victimhood. And yes, I admit that I've been in those moments as well. But overall, other than that, yes, shadow work did benefit me in some ways in my life. But I think there are better ways to gain the same results, and that is by not fixating so much on yourself and not making all of this about yourself, but actually inserting this within the context of community either by engaging in some group work, community aid, somatic work, therapy, and so on, and seeing the results of that emanating into your functioning within the community with other people, right? This is not something that we just do for ourselves. We are not the center of the universe. And I think it's really important to remember that no matter what. And it kind of sucks to see shadow work being almost abused in this way, where it's used for some kind of self-ascension or enlightenment or whatever the fuck. I don't think that was ever the point, actually. If you're doing all of this just for yourself, what's the fucking point? But yeah, that's kind of besides the point. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for watching, and again, let me know what you think about this. See you around soon. Bye.